when I was asked to be facilitator by Randy, part of this is I have a very surface understanding of what's gone on in northeastern Minnesota and northwestern Ontario about the Dark Sky Initiative. But members we have here have a much deeper perspective on that. So over the last several years, the National Forest Service, specifically the Superior National Forest and the BWCA, in conjunction with the Voyageurs National Park and Ontario Parks, and specifically the Quantico, have been engaged in an effort to get all of their respective areas designated as dark sky areas. It was a remarkably collaborative effort amongst all of these groups, and in some ways was probably supported by the fact that all of us have been part of Heart of the Continent Partnership, a binational cross-border effort to really support, talk about, expand people's knowledge of the public lands, but also their importance to the communities in the area. And you will see, if you look, that many communities are starting in this region, are starting to notice how dark skies are probably important to them. So we have 3 members from each of the groups. Ann Schwaller, to my immediate left, is the Superior National Forest Wilderness Program Manager for the Boundary Waters community. That's really a mouthful, and I try and say that. I told her she had to send it to me so I could get it right, but it's if I think about it, it's easy enough. She's been in the position 16 years, and she had a little piece at the bottom, and I remember her telling stories about growing up in the southeast, and that the Everglades were her inspiration for the work she does. Next to her is Bob Degross, who is Superintendent of Voyageurs National Park. He started there in late 2016. And prior to coming to northern Minnesota, he was Chief of Interpretation and Public Affairs at Big Cypress National Preserve. Something not mentioned in his bio, but which he told me, is that while he was there, he was involved in the certification of that park as a dark sky place. It was the first National Park Service area east of the Mississippi to receive that certification. And up on the screen is Brian Jackson, who is biologist for Quantico National Park. He's been a biologist in Atikokan, the town immediately to the west of the park, and associated with Quantico since 1991, but he's worked specifically for Quantico since 2015. While dark skies is our topic tonight, I first met Brian when he presented about red pine and fires in the Quantico. A wildly interesting presentation that I remember multiple pieces of, even though I'm not a scientist and just it's not my bailiwick. But thank you all for participating. So I'm just going to hand this off first, and my thought was, I've given a short bio, but I would ask, and we'll start with Ann and go around, what would you say drew you to this work, and what it is about the wilderness areas that grabs you?
Well, I grew up on a wild and scenic river in Florida, and I was very outdoorsy, and I don't know, something that I've always done, always been interested in. I volunteered a lot in state parks where I was growing up, and I think the biggest thing was South Florida is expanding every day. and they're knocking down woods every day. And I think that was what kind of pushed me into it, the interest in preserving places.
Thanks. Thank you for the invitation for participating this evening. I appreciate that very much. For me, I grew up in West Central Wisconsin, and I grew up in an agricultural area, and we were always doing things outdoors. And so I just had always wanted to work in an outdoor setting and in conservation, basically. I don't know if any of you have ever read Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, but he talks about nature sense as being one of the additional senses that some people have and everything. And I don't know if I just always had that or not, but I was lucky enough to start working with the National Park Service in 1989 and have worked all across the country in a variety of different places, which I'm very privileged to be able to have done. And I really and truly do believe that the National Park Service cares for the special places that tell the story of what the United States and we as Americans are. And so I'm just very honored in being able to do that and everything. So,
Brian, how about you?
First of all, I want to pass on Trevor Gibbs, the superintendent of Quantico, and he wasn't able to make it here tonight. He knows a lot more of the background around the dark sky stuff, but I'll try to answer what I can. I grew up a Southern Ontario farm kid, and if you ask my parents, they're not surprised I turned out to be a biologist from a young age when they couldn't keep me out of creeks or streams or puddles or bush anywhere. One of the reasons I actually moved to Atikokan as a biologist was the Quantico Park, being right beside Quantico Park. I had worked in various spots in Northern Ontario, and this was just a special corner of the province. And so a few years ago, when the opportunity came up to be the biologist in Quantico, I kind of jumped at the chance. Much
Great.
like Bob said, it's kind of just in you.
Great, thanks. So maybe I'll start with you, Bob, and tell me, how does the dark sky fit into what you think about parks and wilderness? Why do this? What's its fit?
and actually I was thinking about this as I was driving down from International Falls today, and the fact that the natural dark sky unhindered is something that we've all connected with through millennia. And the fact that our stories, many of our stories, are originated from looking up at the stars. And it's interesting because everyone, all early cultures, all around the globe, were looking up and just in awe of what they were seeing and everything. So it's just something that, much like Brian was saying, in terms of just being connected to the outdoors, it's just a natural resource that we are all definitely connected with. And it's just hard to believe that now today, because of urbanization all around the globe, that 90% of the people don't have the opportunity to see an unhindered dark sky. The very thing that is the impetus to many, many of our stories through time and everything. So.
And I should say that it is perfectly okay for anybody to jump in if they hear something somebody says and act off it. So Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have the same feeling that you can look at the sky and know that people thousands of years ago saw pretty much the same thing you're looking at, minus the satellites, of course. But yeah, that to me is really exciting, because so much around us changes all the time, but that is a nice constant. But I first started thinking about it when they started putting up cell towers all around the boundary waters and the blinking lights. And I thought, we always talk about campsites and portages and landings and all of these things, and we think about the physical effects of visitor use, we forget that scenery is more than just that. It's also the sky, and it gives us the opportunity to think about that and how to protect it, and what it really means to visitors.
Brian?
Yeah, I think partly it's this whole dark sky thing is, I think to a certain degree, we kind of take the night sky up here for granted. I think we just get used to walking out within a couple minutes, seeing all the stars, and that's just part of what living in the North is. I think till you kind of step back and realize, and growing up in Southern Ontario, obviously, the stars are much brighter up here. There's way more stars up here. So I think that personally, it kind of reminded me what a special thing this is, and how lucky we are to have it, and how important it is to protect it. And to a certain degree, I think we've in the past ignored the half of the day that is nighttime, and not thought about the importance of that part of our lives.
One thing, growing up in West Central Wisconsin, eventually I got my first permanent job down in Ann's neck of the woods in 1994, working at Everglades National Park, and worked there for 10 years, and then went to Big Cypress after that. And working in South Florida, the first time I ever lived in an urbanized area, right? I grew up in a farming town of 1,000 people, and I actually didn't live in town. I lived outside of town. But then going and living in Miami, because there's not a lot of housing out in the Everglades for the employees of Everglades National Park. Living in Miami or Fort Lauderdale or on the West Coast in the Naples area, where you are constantly, I wasn't used to constantly having that orange glow of the horizon during the night and everything like that. And then just to go out into the Everglades, the place that Ann, in other places in South Florida that were so impactful to you and everything, it's amazing to go from that diametrically opposed setting, I guess you could say. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for us to really look at what we can do to just minimize the impacts to the greatest extent possible.
So one thing that I would say about this, I think about this all the time about the kids and families, people who have never left a place, a city in which the sky is not available to them. All they see is the orange glow or the grayish white that shows no stars except Venus occasionally or something. But and that if we could even move slightly back for people to a place where the lights aren't so intense and aren't taking up the whole night sky. Now, interestingly, the last time we did this in person, I remember quite a conversation about, well, if you don't have lights in the city, crime will break loose, So it's an interesting piece of the conversation, but even in the parks and at Quantico and in the boundary waters, the issue of how you do it becomes important. So I think the question next is, what is the designation, and why does it matter? So.
Well, just to jump back, I wanted to talk really briefly about the Everglades. So I've been working for the Forest Service since 1992, and Hurricane Andrew hit Miami and Homestead and the whole Everglades area. It was devastating. And for the first time, so I went down there to help clean up and whatever. And for the first time, all the electricity was out. And I'd never been in Miami where you could see the sky. It was crazy. But anyways, it was just at that moment in time, I thought, wow, so people living here don't see the night sky ever unless the hurricane knocks out all of the electricity. Anyway,
No, that was a great.
sorry,
comeback.
Frank.
No, what is dark sky designation and what does it, the designation mean?
Yeah, so for me, I started talking about this in, I think, 2008. Started having the conversations in earnest in 2009 with, at the time, Quantico superintendent and Voyager superintendent. We just started talking about light pollution and what it means, and is it really going to affect our protected areas? And if it is, what can we possibly do about it? And then I, started reading articles about International Dark Sky Association. All of these pieces started coming together for me. I think I mentioned the cell towers and thinking about how light pollution might be affecting the boundary waters inside. And I was working on a project that was measuring the condition of wilderness character in the boundary waters. And one of those things has to do with opportunities for solitude and primitive recreation. And that's where I thought, okay, well, where can I put the benefits of dark skies in this discussion? Yeah, and so I think, gosh, I don't know, every year I was talking to leadership about it, and all of our partners and Heart of the Continent partnership, we started talking about it more and more and more. And I finally just called Starry Skies Lake Superior and Randy, talked to Randy about it, talked to the Night Sky Division with the Park Service, just talked to all kinds of people to see, well, what can I possibly do about this? So to answer your question, to me, it means another way to measure any kind of impacts, whether it's positive or negative, on the wilderness character of the boundary waters. So to me, it's a way to analyze effects from things that are happening either outside the wilderness or things that are happening inside the wilderness. So it's another management tool, but it's a special kind of tool, and it's something that you can pretty much find an agreement with almost everyone.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Somebody reminded me of a story here. A few years ago, we brought some first generation Canadians. The 4 girls were all from Toronto. So we brought them up for a big canoe trip through the park, and we also had some girls from Lac La Croix First Nation on the west side of the park. And we'd planned the trip, and there was several. We went in big Voyager canoes, and we had a bunch of stuff about the history of the park, and we're hoping to see moose and all that type of stuff. And I guess the first night it rained. Second night we were camped on Sturgeon Lake. Sun goes down, and somebody mentioned something about the Northern Lights, and I thought, oh well, maybe. And so they stayed up till it got dark, and I thought, oh, it's a long shot that we're going to see the Northern Lights, and they were just blown away by the stars. I think it was one of the highlights. We'd never even thought about this, but they had never seen stars like that in their entire life. And the girls from La Croix were kind of looking at them going like, well, what's so different? And this what everybody's night sky looks like? And that was around the beginning that Trevor was kind of mentioning this, and I kind of thought, yeah, like this is something that is pretty unique. Like access to this ability to see this to see the night sky is pretty unique. And although you go north from here, and it just gets darker and darker to a large degree, that's not very accessible country. So yeah, I think that was kind of the point where I kind of went, oh, this is from a value to people. This is really important, and this is something that you just don't get everywhere. And now I forget what your question was, so.
That was good. Perfect.
In terms of the certification, which the certification was developed by the International Dark Sky Association, and then a variety of different public land area agencies and sites were seeking the certification. And so for the Park Service, it's a little bit different than for the Superior National Forest and the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness, specifically, or Quantico Provincial Park. Both Quantico and the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness are wilderness areas, so they have very little development in them, right? National parks, matter of fact, the Forest Service manages far more wilderness than the National Park Service does in the United States. And national parks, we have that 100+ year history of not only protecting the areas, but also developing the areas to a certain extent to provide for the services for the visitors who are exploring those areas. And so for us, specifically at Voyageurs National Park and a lot of other national park areas around the country, I think it's us as an agency being committed to minimize our dark sky impacts to the greatest extent possible, considering the amount of development that we tend to have in national park areas as compared to areas of the U.S. Forest Service around the country, or a lot of the provincial parks, especially those that are up in Northwest Ontario.
Bob, following up, so I know that some of the things you did, but kind of talk about some of the things the park did to change practices to move forward on this.
So to achieve the certification through the International Dark Sky Association, land management area, depending on the type of certification that they're seeking, the land management agencies have a variety of different things that they have to achieve. For Voyageurs National Park, we were certified specifically as a dark sky park. So we had to do an assessment of our current facilities and identify how we could retrofit those facilities and their outside lighting to reduce the amount of impact on our natural dark sky. So besides doing that light assessment of our facilities, we also do an assessment of our current night sky conditions, basically creating a baseline that we want to be considerate of as we go through this process, or as we continue to manage this issue. And so those are two things that we had to do: the facility assessment and our existing dark sky quality and everything. And then in our dark sky plan, we also had to identify how we were going to retrofit our facilities and within what time frame we were going to do that in. We also commit to continuing to do dark sky quality measurements on an annual basis and reporting back to International Dark Sky Association in terms of what we're seeing. And then the last commitment is to do public education and outreach related to this issue and encouraging people to be mindful of it. So those are the requirements to put in your plan to seek certification.
And specific things, same question, but.
Sure. Yeah, one of the biggest things was convincing IDA that we didn't have a lot of facilities inside the boundary waters. It was an interesting conversation for sure. But well, what about your signs? Well, it's supposed to be one of the most primitive types of land management areas, so we don't have lighted signs. Well, what about your hotels? Nope, no hotels. So that was kind of fun to keep saying nope, nope. But one of the interesting things is sharing a border with Quantico and Voyageurs. You know, they have entrance stations. They have a couple that are right on the border: Cache Bay on Sag Lake and Prairie Portage on Basswood. So they do have facilities right at those entrance stations, and they do have lighting. And so we worked together a little bit on discussing that and how that, you know, impacts both of us. And we also have in holdings on the far west end that have some lighting, so we worked with them. So as far as partners, and in Holdings, we were able to talk about lighting needs and changes and all of that. And also, it gives us a platform to talk about, what at your campsite in the wilderness, you don't need to light up the entire campsite. You don't need 5 LED lamps that you can see from space. So there's some of that. So it provides a really good platform for that. Yeah.
Brian, anything to add?
Yeah, just similar to what they mentioned, we had to review all our facilities and we changed a bunch of lighting and changed a bunch of fixtures to direct the lighting differently. But Anne's last point, the education thing, I think that's probably been one of our bigger things. We have guides to be a dark sky camper, especially around the campgrounds. Trying to get people to turn off their light strings so they're not on all night. And beyond just the impact that has in our campgrounds, it's raising awareness of people's impact on light, the importance of keeping a dark sky, and they're taking that home with them. I know the discussions have already hit Atacocan. If how should if we're Atacocan, if you're replacing lights, should you be looking at this too? And other campers, it's a pretty if anybody leaves their lights on in the campgrounds at night, it's pretty quickly pointed out, hey, those guys, tell the park wardens those guys should have their lights off. So I think that's in Quantico's case, I think that education that gets carried outside the parks is really important.
Yeah, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so, it was no secret that we had a bad drought this summer, and we had a lot of campfire restrictions in place for the forest and even the wilderness as well. And I had a lot of folks say, having a campfire is a huge part of my experience. I didn't think I was even going to come back. If I couldn't have a campfire, I was devastated. I came anyway, I didn't have a campfire, and I couldn't believe how many stars I saw without a campfire. And I had a lot of people say that to me. And you can say that, but they just have to discover it for themselves. And so that was a bright spot of fire restrictions this year in my mind.
So Brian, I was thinking as the biologist in this crew, so what do you think the impact of dark skies are on the animals, birds, et cetera, in these places? Is there an impact that you identify?
Across the broader, well, we haven't been able to measure it. And again, much like for a lot of Quantico, we didn't have to make any changes, it's just dark out there. But like around the campgrounds, we've kept things darker. We know in a continental scale, the lights affect bird migration. They affect a lot of nocturnal insects. You can leave a light on and you can see how much moths drawn to the light, how much that affects their stuff. So the more even around the campgrounds, which because we have relatively open grassy or relatively few open grassy areas in the park. We have a lot of insect species around there, and trying to keep the lights down is a more natural condition for those nocturnal species, which again, we're always sleeping when those guys are running around. We hardly think about them most of the time. So I think we probably don't know as much about what's going on at night as we do about species we sit and watch in the day. But there's more and more research going on about the importance of a natural dark sky.
Either of the others, if you have any comments on that?
I know, especially in Florida, and going back to Florida again, but with sea turtle nesting and things like that, major light pollution has a big effect on that. As a matter of fact, many communities in Florida have ordinances where if you live on the beach, you have to have your lights off during the nesting period or even the hatching period as well, because it will really mess up the natural rhythms of sea turtles doing their thing and everything. There are a lot of impacts, especially not as much at Quantico where you have the natural dark sky, but it's the places that are greatly impacted by artificial lights that things are just thrown off quite a bit. And not only for the variety of different wildlife, but for human beings as well and things. I mean, there's studies that show that places that people living in places that have a lot of light pollution and things, there's physical trauma to human beings because of having to be exposed to that all the time and stuff. I don't have right off the top of my head, I know that there's some publications in the back there, if I'm not mistaken, and everything, but I don't have that right off the top of my head what those impacts to human beings are, but we are starting to see health related impacts because of overuse of artificial light. The thing about this, think about it. Artificial electric lights were only invented, 140 years ago now, or something like that, maybe 150 years ago. This is an issue that we're talking about that has evolved from basically 0 to 60 in 150 years and things. It's just amazing when you think about it. Thinking about what Miami looked like in 1890, the year that it was first established, or Duluth in 1890 or 1880 and everything like that, to what it is now is just amazing that such a large impact can be created over such a short period of time.
Florida is getting top billing this evening. No, I was just going to say that when I was a little kid, I used to volunteer at the beach to turn the turtles around after they hatched, turn them away from the highway and get them to go back to the ocean. But anyway, yeah, all I can say, I'm not a biologist either, but all I can say is that with projects that we have near the edge of the boundary waters, and we do, effects analyses, we do have a wildlife biologist that will comment on possible effects from lights, from whatever the project is, and mitigation for that. And we didn't used to do that 5 years ago even, talk about, and now we're starting to think about noise pollution as well as light pollution, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's part of the discussion, and that's all I really was hoping for, that it would be the part of the discussion for everything we do.
So this, Bob said this earlier, but the National Park Service actually has a dark sky and what's the other, and sound. Tell me, what's the group called?
Well, in the National Park Service, we have central offices out in Colorado. We have an air quality division. We have a geological resources division. We have a biological resources and water resources division. And we also have a natural sound and dark sky division, basically. So when we do any type of planning, and basically that's our lives, right? Planning. Basically any type of action that we undertake, we have to do it based upon a plan that was developed in the past. And now we've been doing it a little bit longer than the Forest Service, we meaning the National Park Service, but that is one of the potential impact factors for us to consider is, okay, once we do this, whatever it is, we can identify that, well, yeah, we should really be mindful of the natural sounds and dark sky impacts related to this particular incident. And it is amazing when you think about it, right, that it's, we're talking about dark skies tonight and the fact that our natural night has been washed out by artificial lights. Just think about the natural sounds that have been washed out because of urbanization and things like that as well.
So I was thinking about this because Bob and Ann and I think you were there as well, were on an island just outside of the Quantico a couple of years ago for one of the Heart of the Continent gatherings, and a fellow who worked for the Natural Sounds and Dark Sky came up to join us, and there was wonderful sauna, and then you could jump off and jump into the cold lake water. But I decided afterwards, having been a lifeguard, that it was a mistake to let people do that. You know, it's dark as all get out, and you jump off this high dock into the water. I thought, oh, this would have been something they tell you not to do. But at any rate, we are standing there on this high dock, and this fellow says, "Do you hear that?" And one of our other colleagues and I are standing there, and we try to hear what he can hear, and he can hear and I finally catch it, but just a little bit, he can hear a wolf howling way off in the distance. And we talked about how that is only possible because it's so incredibly quiet up there. And I think about this, and the dark sky is the same, the idea that many people don't get to see these things. This weekend, we have a cabin in central Wisconsin, and it's very quiet there. And it's off the grid. It doesn't have running water or power. But there was a large gathering of motorcycle aficionados, and literally all weekend there was just a hum. And they were a long ways away, but it completely kind of wiped out all that natural sound. Like any of the birds and things were just, you could hear them, but they were kind of mixed in with the sound. So I love the idea that somebody's studying the natural sound as well as the dark sky. It's important. And then the other story I thought about as relates to dark sky that was an example for me of how you can do things that impact your ability to see the dark sky. Ann and I were part of the original Congress that started or kind of enlivened Heart of the Continent Partnership. And one of the nights we stayed at Old Fort William. And so Old Fort William is close to Thunder Bay, but they have a dormitory that you can stay at, and we were all staying at the dormitory. Well, the dormitory, now you wouldn't want to live like this, but the dormitory has shutters over every single window, so there's no light that escapes at night. And somebody came back in, you remember this, and said, "Oh my gosh, the Aurora Borealis." And a whole bunch of us went out and laid on our backs and watched this incredible light show of every color of the rainbow going off above us. But what I know is if all those windows had been open and the light had been shining out, we'd have seen it, but we wouldn't have seen it, and the impact wouldn't have been the impact that I remember from that. It was really, and so we can do things that make a difference. Randy's been working on this locally and trying to get things to happen, but making sure that those special places, our parks, our forests, our wilderness are protected seems really important. So so we talked a little bit about animals and its impact on that. You know, I have a question. Nobody mentioned challenges to making this happen, the dark sky designation. Were there challenges? Ann, you have the mic.
You know, I think the biggest challenge for me, like I said, I've been working on it since 2008, or at least the idea. The biggest challenge was making sure that I had internal support. You know, we have a considerable turnover sometimes when it comes to leadership. And I hate to use this phrase, but having the stars align for having, a superintendent at Voyagers who's totally in support, having superintendent at Quantico, La Verande Provincial Park is also part of the discussion, and Grand Portage National Monument, they're still moving toward hopefully their application process. But I think the timing was the biggest challenge. And, there was always something that took higher priority over this, whether it was litigation or NEPA or some emergency. But that the year that it just all came together and we all were having the same conversation and the same goal was fantastic. So there was really no opposition. It was just timing, I think, just waiting silently in the grass. But yeah, and I did want to talk really quickly about the certification. You asked, what all does it mean? And the one thing I wanted to say that I failed to say was having that measuring stick, finally being able to have the data that we all collaborate on now, which is really great. We take measurements along the border and swap them. But having that data, because if you don't have any of that data, you have no idea if a project is affecting your area or not, if you're not measuring anything. So for me, that was one of the biggest take homes for that, was like, wow, we have data, we can actually look at trends and see what's being affected and what's not.
I would agree with Ann that I think one of the biggest hurdles was just turnover of specific people at each of the public land areas at a specific time. That, I think you said that you started the conversation in 2008 and we finally got our certification in 2020. Was it 2020 or 2019? I forget. 2020, right? Yeah. So it was just, unfortunately, because of turnover of people, it just took much longer than what it needed to take and everything. We have to be very mindful to call it a certification, not a designation, in the United States at least. It was about 2018 or so that Congress was sort of like, what is this Dark Sky Association and what is all this dedication or designation that's taking place? And they made it very clear to us as agencies that only Congress has the ability to designate things within any public land areas. So that's why working with IDA, we're very, very cautious of our.
You should have corrected me earlier about
Yeah, well, you don't work for the agency. So, so we're mindful of making sure that we call it a certification and everything. Voyagers National Park, we have 5 gateway communities: International Falls, Rainier, Cap Togama, Ash River, and the Crane Lake area and things. There was some nervousness in the gateway communities. Some people were coming to me and saying, well, does this mean that you're gonna ban campfires in the park and everything? I'm like, no, we're not gonna ban campfires in the park. We do want people to be mindful of the size of their campfires, as we do at any time and everything. Or, you're gonna make the communities do this or do that and everything. So the one thing that I'm always mindful of when I talk to people about this is that, as I said earlier, it's a commitment by the agency to ensure that we are mindful of our impact at our facilities. If it starts open dialogue in the local communities, I'm very supportive of that. And if individual citizens in those communities start to recognize the importance of also being mindful of their impact within their towns or cities, that's wonderful. And that's what America is built on, right? Open dialogue and open conversations. So yeah, I'm hoping that, a matter of fact, I think a lot of the gateway communities, after their nervousness was sort of set aside, are really embracing it, and we're recognizing the benefit this is to really tout another outstanding resource that we have here in northeastern Minnesota and northwestern Ontario, that it really encourages people to come up here to experience more than just maybe fishing or canoeing and things like that, but another resource. Actually, dark sky tourism over the last about 5 or 6 years or so has really taken off as something that people want to experience, especially up here where we have the added bonus of not only seeing an outstanding natural dark sky, but the potential of seeing aurora borealis.
Brian, so I sense that the challenges were a little different in Canada. I'm not sure if that's true, but just listening to Trevor occasionally.
Yeah, and Trevor probably a lot better at answering the challenges. I sense that the main challenge was getting people to think this was the priority of the day. There's always something else that probably popped up as a higher priority, and it takes time to go through and do all this stuff. And there was funding requests to get some of the lights changed, and deal with that part of it. But and convincing higher ups that that yeah, this was the thing we needed to do today, not tomorrow. But I think the support was there for it. The biggest challenge that I see from my chair is sorting out which one of the port crew people get to go around and take the measurements, because I think it's their favorite trip of the year. The portages are usually clean by then, so they just get to paddle around and then wake up in the middle of the night and look at the stars. So they all want to go do that one.
So this, Brian, actually brings me to a question Andrew asked me earlier, and I don't know who can answer this, but it was a techie question. What are the tools and how do you see what the level of darkness is? Anne, are you a good person to answer it?
Well, we both are, I think, Bob. It's really, yeah. Yeah, there's just this little light meter, very small, easy to carry. You have to go when it's a new moon, so it's as dark as possible. You can't any cloud cover, that kind of thing. You get up a certain time of the night, depending on what the darkest time is for your area, and take 6 readings. No, 5, yeah, 6 readings, average them, and see how it stacks up, or if it's dark enough or not. It's really fun. It's not really fun when the mosquitoes are still out in June and July at 2 a.m. When you're trying to write things, but yeah, it's pretty simple. You just have to make sure that you follow the protocols and do it at the same time, because it is a collection. We only have about 2 units. We got lucky. For this one for free.
And the sky quality meter is the easiest piece of equipment. I know when we were doing our baseline data collection and we were working with the Natural Sounds and Dark Sky office, they brought out much more high-tech equipment that really helped us get a better sense of our baseline. And that was like 360 cameras, 360 infrared cameras and everything that would be able to detect any light pollution from any of the communities. We did that at the park. I don't know, maybe you all didn't do that because you really don't have a lot of gateway communities once you get into the interior of the wilderness and everything. Yeah, so we ended up doing that at some of our more popular areas, well enough away from the gateway community so we could see what type of light glow they might be creating to the unseen eye. I know another challenge that we have is it's hard to do public programming in June for dark sky because you end up not doing the programs until 11 o'clock because it doesn't get dark enough until then. But yeah, it's a challenge that I've discovered.
Brian, anything to add?
No, so from the I guess the public education thing, one of the things that I guess the opportunities that this has given us is You know, I mentioned people have watched the stars here for centuries and centuries, but for, you know, for centuries, the people that stood on a rock at Sturgeon Lake and looked up at the sky, they didn't see the Big Dipper. They saw the Great Fish. So we've also used, you know, had the opportunity to partner with people from Lac LaCroix and talk about their names and stories around the stars in the skies and the constellations and stuff. And there's a really good book, Ojibwe sky map that's we've been using, and there's some good sky charts that we've been sharing with the public. I think we don't have the public education, you know, the naturalist led type stuff, so we produce a lot more pamphlets and self-guided type things. The other thing about opportunities and for tourism, we have three and adding more cabins. We call them rustic cabins, but which we've been renting out. They become increasingly popular, and they're all year round. So that's been, I think, an important part of it is that we've been able to market. We've had people coming from Toronto, a long ways away, to rent our cabins in the middle of winter, and marketing that we're a dark sky location, and you know, if the sky's clear, you're going to see stars like you've never seen before, and the opportunity to see the Northern Lights. I think it's been an important part of marketing, and as I said, we've got 3 right now. We've just got approval for a few more. So
one thing that we talked a little bit about challenges, and I do know that some of our partners in Heart of the Continent Partnership, who are managers of public land, haven't been able to jump on as greedily as the Park Service, the National Forest, and Quantico. And that is because of some of the concerns that Bob, I think, expressed, that communities were worried initially that this might hamper what they could do or things. And I think one of the things that really happens as a result of what the Boundary Waters and Voyagers and Quantico have done is it shows people this is possible, this is a good thing. It invites people up to see the dark sky in ways that I think they will show the way for other people to join on. So, were there?
Hello. Hi. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I was wondering, these Elon Musk satellites, the horrors of this 5G frequency modulation, how are the satellites going to affect everything? And are they just everywhere, or do they expect them to be everywhere?
I don't know very much about it. From what I understand, certain companies have plans to have a vast network of satellites out in low Earth orbit and everything. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on what we see when we look up at the night sky, right? And I haven't dove into it enough as of yet to get a good sense of it, but it is definitely going to, from my opinion, it's going to cause us not to see the natural dark sky without some level of impact of a number of artificial items floating around. I know one of the things that I typically say when I talk about this issue is, you know, the natural starry sky is there, and it's been there for millennia, and all we have to do is shut a light off, very easy step, to be able to see what people have seen for thousands and thousands of years. I can't really say that anymore, though, because there are plans for potentially changing things, causing more items to be in our orbit and everything. So yeah, it's going to be different.
It is Ann, go ahead.
I was just going to add that it might confuse people looking for certain constellations. It's confused me. And if there's enough of it, I think that would be weird. But yeah, I don't.
So I was going to say, one of the things I'm struck by is when the first satellites were up, and you maybe would see a satellite go across your view of the night sky once in a night, but oftentimes you could look up there, and there were a few of them up there, but you never saw them. Now you look up in the night sky, and almost always you see at least one moving across your vision. So the impact over the long term, I can't say either, but it's like so many other things where we just allow an expansion of something without the thought of its impact. And so whether that's brighter and brighter lights, most of you have been driving on the highway and been blinded by the new lights in some cars. You're just like, why do they need to be that bright? You know, there's just, and that's spread all over the place. So I think we are nearly at the end. So last words, any last words, Ann?
Just, I hope that this, spreads. I hope some of the gateway communities are interested in becoming dark sky communities or urban place, dark sky places, and those kind of certifications, because that'll do nothing but help public lands that they're near. I hope it spreads to just communities anywhere, everywhere, so everybody has the opportunity to see a dark sky. And just hope it keeps spreading.
Lucky enough to have this outstanding resource here, and hopefully, like Ann had said, pretty much just hopefully people start to recognize it as a valuable resource that we should be mindful of, and that we work together to see how we can minimize our impact to the greatest extent possible. And it's so easy, right? We can do something individually, as simple as just really doing an assessment at our house and seeing, okay, what lights do I have on the exterior of my house, and what lights do I truly need? And it's also for companies or different municipalities. It's an effort that actually creates a cost savings in the long run and everything. So hopefully, like Ann said, it just spreads. People start to recognize it as something that we should be mindful of no matter what we're doing, whether it be building our own house or a shopping mall being developed or whatever it is. It's definitely something that is very easy to reverse and manage. And like I said, it would save money. So
Brian, the Canadians get the last word.
Yeah, same thing, and you know that people remember to appreciate what a valuable gift this is, that to be able to go out and see the night sky and in dark condition, that and not take it for granted. And as mentioned, you know, hopefully it spreads and people start to think more about how there could be impacting the ability for us to keep seeing this into the future.
Great. Thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks to you who came as well.